My name is Rachel, and I'm 52 years old. For most of my adult life, I have believed in quiet consistency, in showing up, in trying to do right even when the world feels crooked. I raised my daughter, Emily, with that same philosophy. Hard work, honesty, humility. I taught her that trust was a currency you protected more carefully than money. Perhaps that is why the story I'm about to tell still stings the way it does. It isn't just about money. It's about the slow shattering of something I believed was unbreakable. In the spring of last year, Emily received a massive merit scholarship from her university. It was the kind of scholarship that made all her late-night studying, part-time jobs, and skipped weekends worth it. Initially, I had paid her tuition out of pocket using a combination of savings, an inheritance from my late father, and the leftover portion of an old investment account I'd nearly forgotten existed. I paid early, before the scholarship details were finalized, because I didn't want her starting college with financial uncertainty hanging over her. When the scholarship finally processed, the tuition account showed an overpayment. A large one, $75,000 to be precise. Enough to shift the air in a room. Enough to give my daughter a safety cushion for the first time in her life. Enough to help her start adulthood without the fear of debt or financial fragility. Emily called me one afternoon sounding confused. She said her student portal showed that the refund was being processed. She asked if I had received any notices, since I had been the original payer. I told her no, not yet. But I would keep an eye out. I said it calmly, casually even. But something in her voice lingered long after the call ended. Attention. A small thread of unease. A few days later, I checked the portal myself. The refund wasn't pending. The system showed that it had already been deposited. Not to my account. Not to Emily's. But to a third account listed under the payer's authority. And there it was. Her name. My own mother. She had somehow inserted herself into a transaction that had nothing to do with her. She had taken what wasn't hers, quietly, almost surgically. I stared at the screen for a long time, unable to decide whether I was more confused or hurt. My mother and I had always had a strained relationship, but theft? That was not a line I thought she would cross. I refreshed the page twice, as if hoping the universe might rewrite the truth. But the details didn't change. The deposit date, the routing number, the recipient name, all belonging to her. In that moment, I felt something ripple through the quiet order of my life, a foreshadowing of the storm to come. I didn't yet know how deep the deceit would run. I didn't yet know the lengths she had gone to. I only knew that trust, the thing I had built my world upon, had taken its first fracture. I closed the laptop and sat in the dim kitchen light, listening to the refrigerator hum, feeling the imbalance settle around me. Something was wrong. Something serious. And it wasn't going to resolve itself. That $75,000 wasn't simply missing. It had been taken. And the person who took it was someone who raised me. 2 days passed before I confronted her. Not because I wanted to avoid the conversation, but because I needed to approach it with clarity instead of anger. I knew myself well enough to understand that rage clouds judgment, and this situation required precision. If my mother had manipulated a school financial system to redirect a refund, I needed to understand how she did it, why she did it, and what she intended to do with the money. I drove to her house on a quiet Sunday morning. She lived in a modest 2-story home in a suburb she adored. The curtains were always drawn, the yard meticulously maintained, the porch light on even during the day. My mother liked things that looked neat on the outside, no matter what rotted beneath. When she opened the door, she looked almost surprised to see me. Not guilty. Not fearful. Just inconvenienced. I asked her directly. I didn't dance around it. I didn't give her an escape. I said, "Mom, did you receive a refund from Emily's school? Because the account it was deposited into has your name on it." What she said next would reverberate in my mind for months. "It was safer with me," she said with a shrug, as if she'd simply borrowed a cup of sugar from a neighbor. Safer with her. As though she were a vault. As though I, the woman who had worked myself ragged to pay those tuition bills, was untrustworthy. As though Emily herself could not be trusted with her own future. I stared at her, trying to understand the logic behind her words. "Safer with you? That's $75,000, Mom. It belongs to Emily. Why would you take it?" She lifted her chin, her voice turning cold in the way I remembered from childhood arguments. "You never handled money well. I thought it was better if I kept it for her until she matured enough to manage it." My entire body went still. I had always known she was controlling, but this was no longer about control. This was theft. Plain and simple. That money doesn't belong to you, I said quietly. It wasn't your decision to make. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, stop being dramatic. It's not like I spent it. I'm holding on to it. You should be grateful. Grateful. The word was a slap. Grateful that she had intercepted a financial refund intended for her granddaughter? Grateful that she had forged her way into a process she had no business touching? Grateful that she had insulted my competence while committing a crime? My pulse throbbed in my ears. The betrayal didn't feel like a single act. It felt like the culmination of a lifetime of small erasures, diminutions, and manipulations. I want the money returned, I said. My voice was calm, but unyielding. She crossed her arms. No, I'm not giving it back until I think Emily is ready. That was when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was deliberate. The mother who had always insisted she knew best had taken something priceless because she believed she was entitled to it. I left her house without another word, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. As I drove home, the betrayal sat in my chest like a stone. I realized then that confronting her was only the beginning. The real battle would be uncovering how she did it, and proving it. My mother was not a cruel woman outright, but she possessed a lifelong hunger to control the world around her. She believed authority equaled love, structure equaled devotion, and obedience was synonymous with respect. Growing up, I spent most of my adolescence trying to navigate her moods, her rules, and the unspoken expectations that I would someday repay her for the sacrifices she claimed to make. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 8. His departure became her perpetual justification for tightening her grip. She told me the world was dangerous, that I wasn't built for independence, that without her I'd crumble under the weight of adult responsibility. And although I eventually built a career, raised a daughter, and managed a household entirely on my own, she never relinquished the belief that I needed her oversight. My daughter, Emily, was born when I was 31. From the moment she entered the world, my mother latched onto her with intense, possessive devotion. She often referred to Emily as her second chance, or the child she deserved but never had. I used to brush it off as sentimentality. Looking back now, I see the warning signs clearly. When Emily reached high school, she grew into the kind of teenager any parent would be proud of. Focused, disciplined, quietly ambitious. She worked at a cafe after school, took AP classes, volunteered at a library, and never once asked for anything beyond what we could reasonably provide. She applied for scholarships with relentless determination. She wrote essays at the kitchen table late into the night, brainstorming ways to tell her story through resilience instead of hardship. When she received her scholarship package, the one that would eventually lead to the refund, my mother reacted with a strange mix of pride and territorial behavior. She told Emily she should let her manage the funds. She said young people wasted money, that she could invest it on her behalf. Emily politely declined. She told her grandmother she wanted me to handle things, that I had always managed our finances responsibly. That did not sit well with my mother. She didn't like being bypassed. She didn't like being told no. And she certainly didn't like the idea of me, her daughter, the one she believed needed supervision, being chosen over her. At the time, I thought her resentment would fade. I didn't imagine she would take action. I didn't imagine she would treat the refund as something she could commandeer simply because she wanted control. But her motives became clearer the more I examined the past. She believed she knew best. She believed Emily was hers to shape and direct. And she believed I was incapable of handling money or major decisions, despite decades of evidence to the contrary. Her arrogance had created a blind spot, one large enough for her to justify theft as parental responsibility. The more I reflected on her past behavior, the more everything aligned into a pattern. Not an impulsive act, but a deeply rooted belief that she had the right to intervene in any part of our lives whenever she chose. I realized with painful clarity that if I didn't challenge her now, she would continue crossing boundaries until nothing belonged to us anymore. The refund wasn't just money. It was a symbol of independence, mine and Emily's. And she had taken it because she couldn't tolerate letting go. I knew I needed proof. Not accusations, not assumptions, but documentation. Facts. Evidence that could not be dismissed as emotional exaggeration or family tension. If my mother had signed something, forged access, or manipulated the system, the trail would exist somewhere. I started with the university's finance office. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. When I arrived, the woman who greeted me, a calm, detail-oriented administrator named Marissa, listened carefully as I explained the situation. I kept my tone measured. I stated the facts plainly. I paid the tuition. A scholarship overpayment created a refund. The system shows the money was deposited into an account under a name that is not mine. I need to understand how that happened. Marissa nodded and pulled up the student account on her computer. After a few moments of quiet clicking, she frowned. "That's unusual," she said. "The system shows the refund was redirected because of a payer change authorization." I felt my breath catch. A what? A form someone signed stating that the payer of record had changed. Usually used for third-party sponsors or financial agencies. It has to include a signature matching the payer's ID on file. She clicked again. Yes, here it is. A scanned document. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see the digital form. There it was, my name typed at the top, my mother's name listed as the new authorized payer, and a signature scrawled beside mine. Except it wasn't mine. I recognized the curve of the letters immediately. My mother had always written with sharp angles, as though carving her identity into the page. The signature on the document matched hers perfectly. "May I have a copy of this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Of course," she said. "This is serious. We take authorization fraud very seriously." She printed the form and placed it in a folder. Then she reached for another document. "There's also a deposit slip attached." My stomach tightened. She handed it to me. At the top was the date of the deposit. Beneath it, the account number, one I had never seen before. And at the bottom, the signature line. Her name. Not mine. My mother had impersonated me in a legal financial transaction. She had signed in my place. She had directed the refund into her personal account. When I looked up at Marissa, she spoke gently but firmly. "This is forgery. You have every right to file a dispute." I nodded. "What would that process look like?" "We initiate an investigation. If the signature is proven fraudulent, we will demand repayment from the unauthorized party. If they refuse, we involve state education authorities and escalate through the legal channels available to us." I felt the weight of the decision settle in my chest. Filing a dispute meant formally accusing my mother. It meant no turning back. It meant drawing a boundary she could never pretend didn't exist. But the moment I saw her handwriting masquerading as mine, the hesitation evaporated. I left the office with a folder full of evidence, each page carrying the truth in black ink. Each document was a step toward justice, not revenge, but reclamation. I had spent my whole life being quiet, accommodating, and forgiving. But not this time. This time, the truth would speak for itself. The dispute process began the following week. I submitted a formal statement, copies of the forged authorization form, and a request for the university to investigate the transaction. I also attached my driver's license signature for comparison. The discrepancy was undeniable. The school moved quickly. Within days, I received an email explaining that the financial office had initiated an internal audit. They would compare signatures, trace the digital submission logs, and verify the IP address used when the authorization form was uploaded. It didn't take long. 2 days later, a representative called me. Her voice was crisp, professional, and unambiguous. "Ms. Peterson, we've already confirmed that the authorization form was submitted from a residential IP address that does not match your location. It matches an address associated with your mother." I closed my eyes. Part of me had still wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, that maybe my mother had thought she was helping, or that she had been misled. But the evidence was mounting into a structure too solid to ignore. The representative continued. "Additionally, the signature does not match the payer signature we have on file for you. Our compliance team has determined that the authorization was fraudulent." The word fraudulent landed heavily. "So what happens now?" I asked. "We will issue a formal demand for repayment. The money must be returned in full to the university before it can be properly reissued to the student. If the unauthorized party does not comply, we are obligated to report the incident to the State Department of Education." I thanked her and ended the call. A sense of justice simmered beneath my ribs, but grief was there too. Grief for the mother I had hoped she could be. Grief for the family I had kept trying to believe in. That evening, I drove to her house again. She opened the door with a tight expression, as though anticipating a confrontation. "They know," I said simply. She stiffened. "What do you mean?" "The university. They traced the signature. The IP address. Everything. She folded her arms, defensive and unrepentant. I told you, I only did what was best. I shook my head. No, you did what made you feel powerful. And now you're going to have to return the money. She scoffed. They can't make me do anything. But she was wrong. 2 days later, she received an official notice. She was required to repay the entire $75,000 immediately. The letter warned that failure to comply would trigger state-level escalation. The truth was unfolding faster than she could contain it. I learned from the school's finance office that she called them in a rage, insisting she had every right to the refund. But her arguments crumbled under the weight of the documentation. Then the turning point arrived. A second notice informed her that until repayment was made, the state would freeze all tax refunds issued to her, something the education office had authority to enforce. When I heard the news, I sat quietly at my kitchen table, letting the reality sink in. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it came in the form of quiet, administrative consequences that landed exactly where they needed to. My mother had built her life on control. I didn't want the confrontation to be explosive. I didn't want yelling or insults or dramatics. I wanted clarity, accountability, a moment where truth was spoken plainly, without the fog of denial. I chose to meet her in a neutral place, a small cafe halfway between our homes. When she arrived, her posture was rigid, her expression tight with indignation. She sat across from me without saying a word. I began calmly. The school has demanded repayment. They've frozen your tax refunds until you comply. This isn't going away. She glared at the table. You did this to me. No, I said softly. You did this to yourself. She looked up sharply. I was trying to protect Emily. You always overreact. You never think practically. I listened, letting her speak her distorted version of events. When she paused, I placed the printed documents on the table, copies of the forged authorization form, the deposit slip, and the IP trace summary. Mom, these aren't opinions. These aren't emotions. These are facts. She glanced at the papers but didn't touch them. I continued. You forged my signature. You impersonated me to the university. You redirected a refund that belonged to your granddaughter. You didn't ask. You didn't discuss. You just took. Her jaw flexed, but she stayed silent. I kept my voice steady. You told me it was safer with you. But the truth is simpler. You didn't trust me. And you didn't trust Emily. You believed you were entitled to make decisions for us, because you always have. Her eyes narrowed, defensive but uncertain. For years, you've told me that I'm irresponsible, that I can't manage my own life without you overseeing it. But I raised a daughter alone. I put myself through years of work and sacrifice. I built a stable home. I made sure Emily had every opportunity. And even now, at 52 years old, you still treat me like a child who can't be trusted. She opened her mouth, but I continued before she could speak. Taking that money wasn't protection. It was control. And it was theft. Silence settled between us, thick and uncomfortable. Then, for the first time in this entire ordeal, something shifted in her expression. It wasn't remorse exactly, but it was a crack, a fissure in the stoic facade she always held. She whispered, I just didn't want to be left out. The admission hit harder than any excuse she could have offered. She had acted out of fear of aging, fear of irrelevance, fear of no longer being the center of influence in our lives. Being included doesn't come from control, I said gently. It comes from trust. And trust is something you broke. She looked away, blinking slowly. For a brief moment, she looked smaller. Human. Flawed. Not a villain, but a woman so terrified of losing significance that she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I stood to leave. The school will continue the process until you return the money. That part is out of my hands now. As I walked away, I felt an unexpected mixture of sadness and strength. I had confronted her with outrage. I had spoken the truth. And I had refused to be diminished by her anymore. The confrontation wasn't about punishing her. It was about reclaiming myself. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. My mother withdrew into herself, no longer calling me daily, no longer involving herself in every minor detail of our lives. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of space, a widening of air that had long been constricted by her constant presence. The university stood firm. Their repayment demand did not waver. The state froze her tax refunds, and a notice was placed on her financial record. It wasn't public, but it carried weight. She would not be able to file for certain benefits, loans, or adjustments without resolving the fraud. At first, she resisted. She told extended family members that I had exaggerated the situation, that the school had made a mistake, that she was being punished for trying to help. But her story fractured quickly when others asked for details she couldn't provide. My aunt called me privately one evening. She had always been the more rational sibling. She said gently, "Rachel, your mother told us what happened, but the story didn't sound right. I figured you'd tell me the truth." When I explained the situation, she didn't interrupt. She just listened. And then she sighed. "I'm sorry," she said. "She's always been this way, but none of us expected her to cross this kind of line. You did the right thing." Something about hearing that from another family member was grounding. It reminded me that I wasn't overreacting, that what had happened was serious, that the consequences were justified. Eventually, the pressure became unavoidable. My mother returned the money. Not all at once, because she had transferred much of it into illiquid accounts and investments, as if trying to bury it beneath layers of ownership. But the state held firm. They froze, seized, and withheld her tax refunds until the full balance had been reclaimed. When the final portion was returned to the university, they reissued the refund to Emily's correct account. I watched her eyes widen when she received the notice. She said, "Mom, I didn't know it was this much. I didn't know everything you went through." I smiled softly. "You earned this. You deserved it. And it's yours now." She hugged me with a kind of fierce gratitude that brought tears to my eyes. As for my mother, she never apologized. She never acknowledged the harm she caused, not directly. But she also never tried to take control of anything again. She stopped making comments about my decision-making. She stopped questioning my ability to manage my own life. She stopped inserting herself into Emily's affairs. Her silence became its own accountability, a quiet recognition that she had crossed a boundary that could not be ignored. Justice had been served. Not through revenge, not through retaliation, but through truth, documentation, and the enforced consequences that naturally followed. Sometimes justice doesn't look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like distance, clean, quiet distance. In the months that followed, I learned something unexpected. Healing doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from clarity, from stepping back and recognizing the difference between love and control, between guidance and manipulation, between protection and possession. My mother's actions forced me to confront a lifetime of patterns I had normalized. The subtle dismissals, the controlling behavior, the belief that she knew what was best for me even when I was a grown woman raising my own daughter. It took the shock of seeing her name on that deposit slip, $75,000 redirected without permission, to finally break the illusion. I realized that trust must be earned, not assumed. Even within families. Especially within families. My relationship with my mother didn't end, but it changed. The boundary became real, not theoretical, not negotiable. She no longer had access to our financial affairs. She no longer had the authority to insert herself into choices that were not hers to make. And although she never apologized, her quiet compliance in the aftermath spoke volumes. As for Emily, the experience taught her something profound about adulthood. That independence is not just about earning your own opportunities, but also about protecting them. She invested part of the refund, saved a portion, and used the rest to secure her first apartment near campus. She told me one day while unpacking boxes, "I feel like I finally get to start my future on my own terms." I smiled, realizing that the entire ordeal, painful as it was, had ultimately given her something priceless: autonomy. When I reflect now, I do so without bitterness. The wound no longer aches. It simply exists as part of my history, a chapter that shaped the woman I am today. My moral takeaway is simple. Parents should guide their children, not steal from them. Love should empower, not control. And when trust is broken, accountability is not cruelty. It is necessary. For anyone listening, I invite you to ask yourself, have you ever endured a betrayal from someone who claimed it was for your own good? How did you heal? What boundaries did you learn to set? Share your story. Someone else may need to hear it. The truth, spoken calmly and clearly, can be the strongest form of justice. And for my daughter and me, it was the beginning of a future rooted not in fear or control, but in honesty, independence, and hard-won peace.